The LA Kings were very quiet at the trade deadline, but Kings fans are not going to be quiet on this fan feedback edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also co-host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 18 years, and I'm a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Well, the NHL trade deadline has come and gone. It wrapped up at noon Pacific time on Friday, and the LA Kings made one move. They did, in fact, trade for a winger, a right-handed shot. It was not anyone we've talked about on this show, and frankly, I didn't see anyone mention this player's name in any of the trade talks I saw involving the Kings, or really anyone else. LA picked up winger Andrei Kuzmenko, and they got a 7th-round pick in 2025 from the Philadelphia Flyers in exchange for a 2027 3rd-round pick. Philadelphia retains 50% of Kuzmenko's contract, meaning the Kings will pay him what's left of his $2.75 million contract for the rest of this season. So who is Andrei Kuzmenko? Well, he's 29 years old. He's a winger from Russia. He's in his 3rd NHL season. He had played parts of 8 seasons in the KHL, Russia's top league, before coming to North America. In his first NHL season, he was amazing for the Vancouver Canucks. 39 goals and 74 points in 81 games. However, the next season, his production dropped off quite a bit. 22 goals and 46 points in 72 games. Not bad. This season, he only has 6 goals and 20 points in 44 games. Now, he's joining his 4th NHL team, starting in Vancouver, traded to Calgary, and then to Philadelphia this season, and now to the LA Kings. He has been described as highly skilled and crafty with a high hockey IQ. Not very big at 5'11", 195, doesn't play much defense. He's a -12 in his career and a -12 on this season. And he's apparently a good guy, well-liked by his teammates. He played with Kings defenseman Vladislav Gavrikov in Russia, so there's a relationship there. He'll have at least one familiar face in the locker room, somebody that can help get him acclimated to LA, so hopefully that can help in his transition process. Kuzmenko is expected to be in the lineup on Saturday against the Blues in the Kings' next game. Where exactly he'll be in the Kings lineup remains to be seen. Could be anywhere in the top 3 lines. My guess is he would be on the right wing with maybe Quentin Byfield and Kevin Fiala. Maybe Alex Laferriere moves up to the top line. Maybe Alex Turcotte moves down to the 4th line, but we'll see. GM Rob Blake said in his media availability after the deadline that Kuzmenko will play on the power play, which makes sense. I would assume the number 1 unit because why not? He had 14 power play goals his first year in the NHL, but in 2 seasons since, he's totaled 12. What do I think of this move? Well, I don't really think Andrei Kuzmenko is going to make much of an impact. The Kings certainly didn't give up much. You could argue they didn't get much. A very minor move, in my opinion, and it could work, but personally, I'm not expecting much. What do they say? Like, expect the worst, hope for the best. I don't know if I'm expecting the worst, but I'm not expecting much. But if it works out, great. For what it's worth, all the Kings players that I talked about as being potential impact players that were also realistic targets that fit the Kings' needs, almost none of them got traded. Matter of fact, only one of them, Oliver Bjorkstrand, ended up being traded from Seattle to Tampa Bay. Jonathan Marchessault in Nashville, Alex Tuch in Buffalo, Rickard Rakell in Pittsburgh, Brock Besser in Vancouver, Kyle Palmieri in New York Islanders. None of them got moved. Now, there were a lot more buyers than sellers this year. As a result, the prices were very high, maybe too high for a lot of GMs, apparently too high for Rob Blake, not willing to pay those prices. And while a few big names did get moved, Mikko Rantanen, Brad Marchand, the amount of total trades were down. The Kings also not picking up a backup goalie, which we thought might be a possibility. And I will say I'm a little disappointed with what the Kings did or didn't do. And I can understand why some Kings fans are disappointed by the Kings' lack of activity. But I will also say that I would rather the Kings not make a move or make a minor move than try to do something big and end up doing something really stupid. Even with the team not playing great lately and seemingly could, use some kind of injection into the lineup, I'm overall okay with it. I honestly can't say that I'm very surprised. It did sound like, if you believe some NHL insiders like Elliot Friedman, it's probably my most trusted source for hockey news. I really think he knows what he's talking about. I think he's got great connections. He said that the Kings were serious about Mikko Rantanen. He said that the Kings were in on Rickard Rakell, but in the end, it didn't work out. And in the end, a guy like Rickard Rakell has to want to play in LA. Apparently, he wasn't interested in that. So it wasn't like the Kings apparently didn't kick the tires on some bigger deals, but in the end, it just wasn't a fit or it didn't work out. And so the Kings are left with Andrei Kuzmenko. Rob Blake did mention in his media availability, if you were thinking about getting a backup goalie, that Eric Portillo, the number one goalie in the AHL, who I had suggested would be a good idea to call him up, have him be the backup. I think he's going to be the number two goalie next season anyway for David Riddick, going probably out. Rob Blake said that Eric Portillo is still hurt and he's going to be out for a couple more weeks. So apparently that's not an option. So it looks like David Riddick is the number two backup for the goalie for the time being. All right, let's get into some fan feedback. And specifically, we're going to start. Usually I go into the order in which the emails were received, but because the trade deadline is such a big deal, we will start with Kings fans' reaction to what the Kings did at the trade deadline. Our first email comes from Brian in Tampa, and he said, interesting to see the Kings mentioned in Mikko Rantanen trade rumors. He would definitely be a big difference maker. A package of Spence Turcotte and a first-round pick or a top prospect for a guy who might only be a short-term rental would be a possibility. Well, again, Mikko Rantanen did get moved, which I was a little surprised at. He went to the Dallas Stars in exchange for a good young player in Logan Stankoven, who scored a couple of goals against the Kings last time, you might remember. The Stars also gave up 2 first-round picks and 2 third-round picks. Plus, just as important, Rantanen agreed on an 8-year deal worth $96 million, so he's getting $12 million per season. There were reports the Kings were willing to pay him $100 million, but Rantanen didn't want to play in LA, and he clearly didn't want to play in Carolina either, and Dallas was apparently the place he wanted to play. No state income tax in Texas either, probably doesn't hurt. But again, if you think about, how the Kings should have gone after Mikko Rantanen, apparently he didn't want to come here. And it certainly seems like, again, he didn't want to play in Carolina, and it was very important to him to go to a place that he wanted to go. Apparently that was Dallas. So yeah, it was interesting to hear that the Kings were potentially in on Mikko Rantanen, and apparently they did offer him more money, if you believe the reports, than Dallas. But again, it was important for Rantanen to go to a place where he was going to get paid well and felt like it was a place he wanted to play. And apparently that was not Los Angeles. Bill from Parts Unknown checks in. He says, I just heard about the trade in which the Kings acquired Kuzmenko from the Flyers. While the Kings apparently only gave up a draft pick, I do not see this as a fix to the Kings scoring problem. Earlier this season, Kuzmenko had a streak of 17 games in which he registered only 2 assists. All that with well over 10 minutes of ice time in each game. I know Blake wanted a right shot winger, but this is certainly not the hired gun I was hoping for. Please give us a silver lining if you can. I always appreciate your show, both to celebrate wins and for catharsis after losses. And that was Bill checking in from somewhere. I will say this about Kuzmenko in Philadelphia. He was only there for like 2 weeks. The Flyers flipped him for a pick. They got him from Calgary in a trade earlier. And he actually had 2 goals and 5 points in 7 games for the Flyers. So that's not bad. But before that, 37 games in Calgary, just 4 goals, 15 points in 37 games. So I mentioned it earlier, I don't think he's going to be much of an impact player, but we'll keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best. I agree with you. He's not exactly the player I was looking for the Kings to bring in. I really thought Kyle Palmieri was going to come to the Kings. I would have bet a little money on that, but he didn't end up going anywhere, which is surprising. Brian in Los Alamitos checks in. He says, I'm actually grateful that Rob Blake didn't swing for the fences this trade deadline because I don't trust him as a GM. He's made too many bad decisions. Offensive-minded players cannot thrive under the Kings system as it stifles offensive creativity. I don't think Blake sees the value of a pure goal scorer unless they know how to play defense. I hate to say this, but I hope Blake is gone at the end of the season. We need a new GM with a modern vision to run this team. Having said that, I suppose I don't trust Luc Robitaille either, and it seems like he's just hiring his buddies. It's really frustrating seeing the Kings doing the same thing and expecting different results. Thanks for another great week of shows, Brian in Los Alamitos. Well, I've said that if the Kings lose in the first round of the playoffs, I expect Rob Blake to not be brought back. My hope would be that the Kings will look outside the organization for their next GM. My fear is that they just promote someone else who's already been there, like a Nelson Emerson, who's the team's assistant GM, Mark Bergevin, who knows if he could be in consideration as well. So I understand the desire for a lot of people to see Rob Blake gone, or maybe it's better to be said just to see a new voice and a change. But everyone just assumes, right, that they're going to get rid of Rob Blake and they're going to bring in somebody better. We don't know if that's the case or not, to be honest with you. So we'll see. Andy checks in from up in Ontario in Guelph. And he says, I don't mind the Kuzmenko trade, given what other Western teams did. Good value for a third. I was hoping for more depth adds, though, to get Lewis out of the lineup and perhaps a backup goalie. Please, let's have a better offseason. I worry about this team not having enough spark to secure a playoff spot, but I do think that they will play better. We'll just have to wait and see. Just wanted to add that despite what politicians say, we Canadians are still your friend, hoping for the best for our two countries and a quick resolution. That was Andy up in Guelph. Andy, we will always be hockey brothers, so we will always have that common ground. You mentioned what other Western teams did. I think more of what Pacific Division teams didn't do, because Dallas and Colorado, who might end up meeting in the first round of the playoffs, had huge moves before the trade deadline. But the Golden Knights and the Oilers didn't do much. I don't think many teams in the Pacific did much of anything. There were some moves, but nothing like some of the other moves we saw, certainly in the Central. And I guess that is kind of a silver lining. The Oilers are scuffling too. So it is disappointing the Kings haven't taken advantage of what Edmonton has done of late. But they're still within striking distance, even though the Kings have not played very well. And Edmonton didn't do much at the deadline. They've got a 5-point lead on the Kings. The Kings have 2 games in hand. 2 head-to-head meetings against the Oilers are going to be huge. And I did see that Edmonton announced that Evander Kane is not going to be back this regular season. Maybe he shows up in the playoffs, but how effective is he going to be if he has no regular season games under his belt, coming back from like a hip surgery? So, the Pacific Division was very quiet at the trade deadline, which I guess is a good thing for the Kings. Wilson in Quebec City checks in. He says, I was going to have a trade deadline watch party, and then it dawned on me there won't be any trades. We have Rob Blake as our GM. Once again, epic fail on Blake's part. I think we've seen enough of him. Fire him now. And that is Wilson in Quebec City. Wilson, I understand the frustration, although, again, with Rob Blake's history of a lack of moves at the deadline, I really wasn't surprised. I did think they would get somebody a little bit more potentially impactful than Andrei Kuzmenko, but we'll see. Rob Blake, by the way, was asked about his contract status at his press conference today, and he did confirm that he is in the final year of his contract, and he said it'll be addressed after the season. And my guess is, yes, it will. Again, I cannot imagine he'll be back as GM if the Kings lose once again in the first round of the playoffs. We've got more of your emails that were sent in pre-deadline day. We'll read some of those here on this Kings Fan Feedback Show. That's next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. The NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to get in on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature keeps you invested in every moment of the game, keeps it exciting, whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three-pointer. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, our next email comes from Sasson, and he's the guy responsible for this. If you're watching on YouTube, my windscreen. He said I was popping my peas, which I didn't think I was, but I figured I'll buy this thing. Costs like $5 on Amazon, and we'll make sure we sound as good as possible. He says, I'm a new Kings fan, and I wanted to get your opinion on Luke Robitaille, Rob Blake, and Jim Hiller and their leadership of the team. I'm brand new to hockey, so I have no idea. But I see a lot of prominent Kings fans and people on Twitter absolutely hating on them for every move they make, criticizing roster constructions, trade, playing time, notably Clark, strategy, etc. Do you think it's fair criticism, or are these people overreacting? Again, I'm brand new to hockey, coming from baseball and NFL, so not really sure what is fair. And that is from Sasson. Hope I pronounced that correctly. In parts unknown. That's actually a pretty good question. And I will say, for all those guys, particularly Rob Blake, it is fair to be critical, certainly, of the job performance he's done. Does some of it go a little too far? Probably. Because I'm sure if Rob Blake would have made, let's just say he pulls off the Mikko Rantanen trade, I'm positive there would have been a significant number of people saying, oh, he overpaid. This is PLD 2.0, blah, blah, blah. Whoever he gave up, they shouldn't have gave up, that kind of thing. But certainly Rob Blake has made his mistakes. And I think if you're fair to him, all general managers have their swings and misses. I think his batting average isn't great. But look, for me, the bottom line is there's going to be moves made that are good. Moves made. I mean, basically, you ignore the good moves or the good signings, and then you focus on the bad ones, which I get it. But for me, the bottom line with Rob Blake is 4 straight years of going into the playoffs. And if they don't advance this year, 4 straight years about in the first round, and no playoff series wins in his 8 years on the job. That's it to me. That's the most damning statement you could say. He's done a good enough job that this team, gets in the 90 points every year and finishes in the top 3 usually and makes the playoffs. But there's got to be some progression. There's got to be more than that. It can't just be the same thing every year. So we'll see. Kurt in Yorba Linda says the team that gets hot going into the playoffs are the ones that will make a run. The season starts now, and I believe that the Kings can make a run if they get hot. I don't believe that they should make any trades and just roll with this group. The Kings style of play is not easy to adapt to, and it takes a special player to jump right in and flow with the group. The Kings style is not pretty, but it will work in the playoffs, just like in football, how defense wins championships. Love your fan feedback shows. Don't ever change it. And again, that was Kurt in Yorba Linda. No plans on ever changing it, Kurt. I love him as well, and I love giving you guys a chance to say what's on your mind. I think the Kings probably wanted to add, but again, looks like the prices were a bit too high for them, so I'm okay with it. The Kings made their offseason moves with the playoffs in mind, and we'll see whether it pays off or not. They got Warren Fogle, they got Tanner Jeannot, they got Joel Edmondson for playoff hockey, so we'll see how it works out with playoff hockey. Frank in Ranchos Palos Verdes says, the voice of reason. We'll see. I believe only a minor move should be made. Well, you got your wish, Frank. Trading Byfield at this point seems crazy to me. He should have been dealt when Eichel was available. The ask from Buffalo, according to some so-called insiders, was Turcotte and Byfield for Eichel. No brainer to me. Also, I would have sent Byfield to Winnipeg instead of Velarde. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Also, one more thing. What the heck are the Kings doing with Clark? Hard to understand the Kings thinking in regards to him. And that was Frank in RPV. Well, again, we'll start with Clark. If the Kings are playing Gavrikov on the right side, which it kind of sounds like from Rob Blake's comments today, maybe that's not going to be the case going forward here on the playoff push. But if they're playing Gavrikov on the right side and if they're playing 6D, I don't have an issue with Brandt Clark not being in the lineup. Now, maybe you do. And again, I'm not worried about Clark's development right now. And if you want to argue maybe sending him down to the AHL is better than him sitting up in the press box, I'd be willing to listen to that. But I really don't have a problem, again, if Gavrikov's playing on the right side and the Kings are playing 6 defense, that Brandt Clark is unfortunately the odd man out. Now, if the Kings are playing 7D, or if Gavrikov is moved back over to the left side and Doughty goes up to the top pairing, then Brandt Clark absolutely should be in the lineup. but there are certain circumstances where I'm not. And again, he's in his rookie year. There's a lot of time left. I'm not overreacting with Brant Clark. As far as trading Quentin Byfield at some point for a Jack Eichel, or sending Byfield to Winnipeg instead of Gabe Vilardi. Look, the ceiling, I think, is still pretty high on Quentin Byfield. Some people might disagree. I'm still willing to give him another full season to see what he turns into. I understand the concern. We've talked about it a lot on other shows, but I think at the time, the Kings obviously felt like he still had a high ceiling. There were other issues, there were some injury issues, some health issues, but just the size of him, the speed that he skates with, guys like that don't come around very often. So I wouldn't have traded him either. And I'm not a huge Jack Eichel fan. I'm one of those people who does not think he's an elite player, but apparently I might be in the minority on that. One more. Let's get in one more here. Gary from Granada Hills. He says, I have serious concerns about the Kings player development, also training and coaching their system from the minors to the NHL. You are spot on with the Kings being the worst team on breakaways and odd man rushes. And we all know the pathetic, unbearable so-called power play, a direct and a product of the coaching failures from top to bottom. During games in the first period, it looks like the opposition always figures out the Kings system and adjusts accordingly, but the Kings coach is lost, just like the players are completely lost. And it trickles down to all of our prospects who are getting worse instead of better. Look at the last 4 games. This team is not making the playoffs, and the only upside is finally Blake and his staff will be gone next year. That is Gary in Granada Hills. I got to be honest with you, Gary. I don't agree with a lot of that, to be honest with you. I would say you're in full panic mode. I'm not there yet. They would have to play another week of hockey like they just played for me to kind of go there. The power play has only really been bad this season. When Jim Hiller was brought in to fix the power play a few years back in his assistant, he actually did a good job. The first year with Hiller, the power play was actually pretty good. The next year it was okay, but it's obviously not acceptable this year. But overall, it's just been this year that it's been bad. I would say other than Kempe and Fiala, the Kings have a lot more grinders than snipers. Even a guy like an Alex Ferrier, who can at times look like he can put the puck in the net. He's more of a grinder type of player. I would say about the Kings periods this year, like if you're saying the Kings start well, but then the other teams figure them out and then the Kings don't adjust, that doesn't really make sense, because the Kings' best period is the third period all year. So, and you're saying they're not adjusting. How would the third period be their best period then if that was the case? I don't know that I really agree with that. Certainly the Kings aren't playing very well at the moment. I still think the Kings are going to make the playoffs. And I think part of that is also because I don't know that Calgary or Vancouver have enough to catch the Kings for that third spot in the Pacific. All right. We are still got a lot of emails to get to. Going to try my best to get them all in. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. All right, our next email comes from Brian in Mission Viejo. He says, I'm writing you after the terrible, horrible loss against Chicago. It comes down to what I see are 6 major issues with the team as of late. Number 1, lack of leadership, specifically Kopitar, Doughty, and Deneau. Too much overpassing, lack of shots on net, lack of goaltending. Big Save Dave is begging to be replaced by Portillo at this point. And we talked about Portillo still out for a few weeks with an injury. Lack of any sort of active power play, and lack of man-on-man play on the defensive end. 5-on-5, we are allowing way too much space for the other teams to move the puck around and get open to cause great scoring chances. That is from Brian in Mission Viejo. Hard to argue with your list. I talked about it after the last Blues game. I do think that they played a bit better as far as the defensive coverage issues they were having. I certainly agree there needs to be more of a shot mentality, more shots on net. This is more of a blue-collar team. Let's score blue-collar goals. So we'll see if that's the case going forward. Jesse checks in from Visalia. He says, it's been a while, cousin. I've been watching this team all season and follow you every day. I've kept my mouth shut, and I'm trying to look at this year's team with a level head. The leaders on this team, especially the ones with the C's and the A's, have not led this team during the slump. As a fan, I do not believe I do not believe what they say, because I see what they do. They are all talk, and then the team needs new leaders. I'm not going to even talk about the trades. It is what it is. Take care, Eddie, and go Kings go. And that is cousin Jesse in Visalia. We kid he's my cousin because he is from an area I grew up in, and his last name's also Garcia. So it's possible. I would say, as I mentioned before, I think the criticism over the leadership on the team right now is fair. Andrei Kuzmenko and Drew Doughty are Hall of Famers. They're Kings legends, but at some point they got to step up and lead this team, and it hasn't happened of late. I love those guys, but look, I mean, no one is going to obviously take the captaincy from Kopitar or take the A off of Drew Doughty's sweater, but those guys absolutely have to lead the team. They're the leaders on the team. This is from Human in Palos Verdes. He says, Brant Clark's long-term future with the Kings, or what is Brant Term's long-term future with the Kings if you had to guess? I am worried that Clark will eventually become frustrated with LA, their playing style, the management, lack of urgency to win, etc. And why are we still playing Lewis every game? Been so frustrating with the roster management lately. I'm sure that Hiller, Blake, Luke are all better at their jobs than the fans complaining, including me, but nothing is really making sense. If Spence isn't dealt, why are we scratching him? Why is Clark, in my opinion, our most talented player being scratched? What about Fagima? What about Hellenius? I have so much to feel and not much to say at this point. Hopefully by the time I'm listening to this tomorrow, we'll have a new top 6 winger. Well, we do, but it's probably not the top 6 winger you were thinking the Kings would get. I've said it before. I'm not worried about Clark at this point. Again, he's played 81 regular season NHL games. So he's basically a rookie. If you were playing for the San Jose Sharks, I'd feel differently about his playing time. Like, I would be like, roll him out there every night, let him learn by doing. But the Kings aren't the Sharks. They're in a playoff hunt, and they need to secure a playoff spot. And right now, Clark isn't quite pulling his own weight. And Jordan Spence, I think, is doing a better job. So that's why he's playing. So I'm not worried about Brant Clark. As for Trevor Lewis playing every night, I don't really have an answer for that one. Now, he's had a hell of a career, over 1,000 games, 2-time Cup winner. I respect his career, and I know he's very well respected in the locker room. But as far as him, it seems like he has to be in the lineup every game, and I honestly don't understand that. I really don't. Darren in Orange County says, after watching the game Wednesday night, I was left with these thoughts. First, the Kings have no finishers on this team. Kempe may be one, but after that, nobody. Second, whoever's running this power play of this team should be fired. He's absolutely embarrassing to watch, or it's absolutely embarrassing to watch. And it's a momentum killer every game. Third, is it me or has this team gotten worse with 8 back on the ice? Record says so. Fourth, Kopitar needs to move down the lines. He's not a number 1 center anymore. And last, Rob Blake, 8+ years as GM. I think regime change is necessary. The fans deserve better. Sorry for all the negativity, but I'm tired of seeing the same old Kings each year. That is Darren in Orange County. I would say Fiala is a finisher, but he and Kempe are pretty much the only two. The man running the power play is Newell Brown, and there were concerns about his hire when he came in, and he certainly has done nothing to change those feelings. As far as the Kings with Drew Doughty back in the lineup, the record is 5-5-2 since he's returned. So not a disaster, but not great either. I would say this about Drew Doughty. I would definitely cut his ice time back. And you're right about Kopitar not being a number 1 center anymore, but he's not getting number 1 minutes anymore. It's been Quentin Byfield. So I would say forget about what they list as the lines. Look at the ice time. And like I said, if it's another first-round exit, I can't imagine that we don't see a regime change, as you say, at least a GM change. Ed in Brea says, just wanted to say I'll be disappointed again if our GM and management do nothing and stick with the path of mediocrity or failing hockey. It's like our GM is a captain of a sinking ship and convincing everyone we'll make it to shore. The Kings will miss the playoffs guaranteed because management won't address our offensive struggles. I will say Darcy Kemper has been a bright spot. Speaking of goalies, asking if you were a fan of Kelly Rudy back in the Gretzky days. Never saw Rudy play. However, I am reading his autobiography, and to me, he is one of the goalies that is a role model. Not elite like Jonathan Quick or Hugo Hachon. Still, he was a goalie that helped the Kings win their first Clarence Campbell trophy and wore number 32 as well. That was from Ed in Brea. Well, Ed, first off, I think you used the word failure or mediocre when describing the Kings. I have a hard time saying that a team that gets 90+ points and makes the playoffs, it looks like 4 years in a row despite your guarantee. I don't think that's failing or mediocre hockey. I understand, though, the playoff aspect of it. Certainly, if you're looking at it from that standpoint, I get that. I did see Kelly Rudy play back in the day, and he was a fun player to watch. I've tried to get him to come on this show. He's a busy guy, though. Does a lot of work up in Canada with the media, so maybe one day it'll happen, but we'll see. He had 73 saves in a playoff game with the New York Islanders one year. All right, we're going to squeeze these two in, even though we're gone a little over time. I don't care. Scott in Simi Valley says, as you mentioned, the Kings need to be selfish and take shots, which isn't really selfish as the team can't win without scoring. Fiala was red hot. Now he's deferring again, passing the puck even when there's a great scoring chance. Q is another guy who needs to shoot. Despite his nice goal against the Blues, he passes way too much. I know we can't expect the Kings to win a cup every year, but we can and should expect them to fire the puck on net. As for the horrible power play, if the Kings won't make an assistant coaching adjustment in season, at least flop the power play units. Couldn't be any worse. I'll close with this new sign-off. I think all Kings fans should adopt at this crucial time, instead of go Kings go, it should be shoot Kings shoot. And that was from Scott in Simi Valley. And we'll close it out with Scott in Carlsbad. He says, the answer to the Kings' last place power play is movement without the puck. The player in front of the net would be excluded from this. The remaining other players should be crisscrossing and interchanging positions frequently to cause mayhem for this shorthanded team. This is extremely difficult to defend. When the players are stationary, it's easy to ensure that all of your defensive bases are covered. And that is Scott in Carlsbad saying what the Kings need to do on their power play. Thank you to everyone who took the time to email, comment on YouTube and X, also on, YouTube. Obviously, this show is literally not possible without your participation. So thank you for all the emails. Really appreciate it. If you would like to send an email, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you can always leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section. Stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Locked On LA Kings. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day. Coming up on Saturday, we're going to recap that Kings-Blues game shortly after conclusion, and we will talk about the Kings debut of Andrei Kuzmenko. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow, and as always, go Kings go.